when I'm working with clients, I always make sure, for me, it feels good to say alcohol is neutral. Your behavior around it is what you want to look at, controlling, or whatever word feels good to you. But alcohol in and of itself is neutral. And that really starts to, like you said, take the stigma away from being powerless.
Our ever-changing world calls upon the most courageous, resilient, and relentless of us to face its most extraordinary challenges. To help you embark on this journey, we present the Impactful Coaching Podcast, your oasis for inspiration and a beacon to spark the fires of greatness within you. I'm Joseph. I will be your ally in this journey to empower your potential. Join us each week as we dive deep into the heart of ambition, drive, and success to unravel compelling stories of daring leaders who dreamed, struggled, and achieved victory. Our journey begins now.
How is everybody doing? This is the Impactful Coaching Podcast. My name is Joseph. I've been in the media space for about 10 years, technically closer to 13 years, but I decided that with my copious amounts of downtime, I just wanted to round it down to 10 years. But it is an honor and a privilege to be able to do this show, share what I can share, learn what I can learn, and help not only get the message out there for all the great people that we're talking to, but to connect coaches to other coaches, connect coaches to potential clients. And the big tentpole objective that didn't occur to me until I had done this show for about maybe 20, 25 episodes is that technology is evolving and at a rapid pace. And if we don't evolve as people to keep up with that, we may lose ourselves in the cogs and the gears. So while that responsibility does not fall to any one group of people, I think coaches have their work cut out for them. And so it is a great honor for me to be able to get those messages out there. So that's me. Hope everyone is doing well. And I am here today with Dr. Sherry Price. Dr. Sherry, we're just call you Sherry going forward. How are you doing today? How are you feeling?
I'm fantastic, Joseph. Thank you. How are you?
I love being asked that question because my gut reaction is always say fine. But I just want to give I'm just going to take a moment here just to tell people a quick story about me. So every year in Toronto, we have this thing called PodCamp, where all the podcasters in the city and anybody who knows about it really all meet up in downtown Toronto to do like a 2-day talk about podcasting. People come up with their own classes, and I look forward to it every year because all of the stuff that I'm good at is self-taught. And so to go to a podcasting class like 2 days out of the year, it's like retroactively getting my education, 1 weekend at a time. But unfortunately, I held myself to a Big Mac at around like 11 p.m. And then I went to sleep at like 12:30 a.m. And then my body decided at around 2 a.m. is to let the Big Mac out in the opposite direction. So that wiped me out for a couple of days, and I missed like one half of PodCamp. So that's unfortunate, but that is sometimes I saw this quote like a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, and it keeps making itself relevant, which is like I think for a tree to reach heaven, the roots have to be planted in hell. And so that lesson, that was a hard learned lesson. So I shan't make that mistake again. So that's how I'm doing. I mean, it's something that'll characterize the rest of my week, and then we move on from it. But just a lesson to all of you is that don't put all of your faith in acid reflux reducing materials. Sometimes you just got to use common sense. Okay, people? All right, so that's what I'm doing.
Thanks for keeping it real.
And thank you to my co-producer and to everyone helping this show out for not punishing me for that. So we have a great episode lined up for you today, and it was an opportunity for me to put a few things together in my mind that have been sort of a long-running thread in just our relationship with some of the things that we consume. And there are, however, some template questions that must be asked in order to formally conduct this conversation. So, Sherry, would you care to start us off by telling us what you do, what you're up to, and what contributions you make to the coaching world?
Absolutely. So I trained as a pharmacist, spent 20 years in my career doing that before I pivoted. And I pivoted around 2017, became certified as a life coach and a weight loss coach in that time frame. Then launched my own business in 2018. And since that time, I've been helping women predominantly around the area of alcohol and reducing it. And then just recently broadening out a bit more to help really perimenopause, menopausal women, look at how they're eating and healthy habits because that drives a lot of our health as we age. I came into this space as an overdrinker myself. So I didn't feel like an alcoholic. That was a term that totally didn't resonate with me. It felt like I just had this overdrinking habit where I drink a little too much, meaning I'd regret it the next day, or I didn't remember conversations, or I said something that was kind of wonky, or I don't know, just kind of embarrassed of the behavior. And I wanted to cut back. Everything I looked at out there were programs designed, whether they had steps or other things, but they were all about abstinence. And that was never really the goal, at least not in the beginning. And so I was looking for ways to just kind of unwind the habit. It felt like just a bad habit. And I came across a coach who taught me ways to unwind the habit and stop over drinking. And I was so enamored by how one's brain can be rewired and create a completely different relationship with alcohol without necessarily claiming abstinence. So I thought this was fascinating and wanted to do this as my second career.
There's a couple of things that I wanted to mention from that, and one of them is I'm kind of surprised that I haven't done this before, because you said that it was a coach that had started working with you on this. Is I might going forward want to ask if people have had experience with coaches prior to becoming a coach. I think if I were to like go through all my files, it's probably been brought up, but it's not something that I formally and directly ask. So how much would you say that experiencing the expertise of a coach inspired you to then take that role yourself?
Yeah, it was definitely instrumental in my journey of healing. And it was definitely instrumental in seeing just the relationships that you can develop in a non-judgmental space. And I just thought that was not an environment many of us have experience or can experience given our lifestyles. I also had to do it this way because as a pharmacist, if I continued to practice as a pharmacist, and at that time, that was my goal, was to continue practicing as a pharmacist, not to leave the profession. But since I'm dealing with opioids and drugs, like having anything on my medical record that I'm seeing a mental health specialist or an addiction specialist, or if I went to an AA meeting and somebody noticed me, even though it's quote anonymous, you are there in person and face. I would just felt that I was jeopardizing all of that education, all of that training. And so that made me very much closed down to those opportunities. When I started practicing this way, I saw like a lot of healthcare people, right? Surgeons, doctors, nurses, a lot of people that can't expose themselves to these avenues of healing because of the repercussion it can have on their livelihood and basically jeopardize their career. And so I was like, this is amazing. And I think there's such a need and there's such a stigma around, especially with alcohol, I guess other drugs too, but that's not my forte, but just around alcohol, it's like glamorized and like criticized. So like, if you can take it or leave it, that's like the sweet spot. But anything else than that, like you either have a problem and if you say no too many times to alcohol, depending on the social environment you're in, right, it just gets a little wonky for people. And there's not many people out there telling others how to navigate those scenarios without claiming like another label. If you're not an alcoholic, then you must be sober, right? It's like one or the other. And neither of those felt the label I wanted to carry.
If you don't mind me asking, because I wasn't sure about this when I was looking through your profile, do you still occasionally enjoy alcoholic beverages, or you're giving
Yes,
me the
I
nod?
do.
Okay, so you still
I
do.
do.
Okay, I do too.
Yeah.
As someone who I personally do have a set of addictions, and although many things can have an addictive quality to them, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to latch on to each of us. So for whatever reason, and I'm not bragging about this because like I said, I got a bunch of other ones that I got to deal with. Alcohol never sunk its teeth into me in such a way. I think some of that is, the hangovers can put the kibosh on wanting to make a habit out of this, but that wasn't what I wanted to get at. What I wanted to get at And this is something that's come up organically just as we've started talking about the difference between abstinence and trying to completely eradicate it and wipe it out from a person's experience versus looking for a more temperate, controlled, cautious, but moderate and respectful approach to it. And what's coming to my mind now is the demonization of alcohol. And if people feel like they're dealing with a different substance, whatever substance you want to put in this block, go ahead. But the demonization of it is a potential overcorrection, because if you have someone who is trying to wipe the usage out completely, that person has to look at alcohol now as an antagonist. Now, I mean, extreme situations could call for extreme measures, but what happens in this person's lifestyle is, like you mentioned, is going to a wedding and going to a party, going to any kind of social outing, or just being at home wanting to enjoy a drink and seeing this villain, assuming that this person has alcohol in his home, which probably doesn't, but seeing this villain not only exist in the public space, but seeing all of these people around us who are still able to enjoy it. And it's this like long form disconnect that it continues to affect people's experience, which I think can end up just driving a person back into those habits anyways. So I'm not sure if the cold turkey, this must be defeated approach is necessarily the most effective, or if it's the most common one, when it seems like this is more of that Japanese Kaizen approach, which is you want to look for small improvements over time and periodically work your way towards a more balanced approach to it. So this is all just what came to my head. I'll give the floor to you to get your reaction.
Yeah, I love your take on it because I think a lot of us, especially being in medicine, right, in pharmacy school, medical school, it's taught once you have a problem, you have to avoid the substance forever, whatever that substance may be. And that's kind of the dogma that you learn. So I think a lot of us continue to proliferate that message. And over time, you start thinking that's the only way to heal. And I don't believe that. I think there are many ways one can heal. I've seen psychedelics work for people with addictions. Like, I believe there are many different ways to healing. And finding the right one that resonates with you. Some people do want to moderate. They don't want to be cold turkey, or maybe they want to do cold turkey for, 3 months just to get out of their system, detox, just write it off, and then come back to looking at ways where they can have it socially, because it is an elixir that brings us together, like for happy hours. And maybe you don't want to change your friend circle. And I don't think we have to do a prescribed one way approach that's going to work for everybody. I am open-minded to consider that I've seen different ways now work for different types of individuals. And I agree with you, demonizing it or vilifying it oftentimes makes us feel more like a rebel, and we just want to go back to it. So when I'm working with clients, I always make sure, for me, it feels good to say alcohol is neutral. Your behavior around it is what you want to look at, controlling, or whatever word feels good to you. But alcohol in and of itself is neutral. And that really starts to, like you said, take the stigma away from being powerless, or these other mindsets that we are told that we need to believe in to overcome. And I don't subscribe to that.
Mm-hmm. So what I want to do next is continue on learning a little bit more about your work in the pharmaceutical field and how this impacted that. Now, I've mentioned this bit on the program a couple of times, and I usually do this with the intention of humor, where I meet people and there seems to be this core tension or core irony, or in a more blunt case, like core contradictions. One of my girlfriend's friends is a massage therapist, but his back pain is excruciating. So you just imagine lying down to relax, and you have this professional doing his job, but at the same time, he himself continues to experience the kind of pain that he should be lying down and dealing with. So he's the one going, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Just lie down. My travel agent who does my taxes, she seems incredibly stressed out. So there's just something like inherently ironic about like, you want to go on a cruise? Yeah, I'd love to go on a cruise someday. Yeah, those sound nice. Oh yeah, let me give you all the nice cruises. And again, like being a comedic mind, that's just this set of characteristics that I'd seen. But in the environment that we're discussing today, it seems like that core tension was something that you must have grappled with because, and you were alluding to this already, is that as a trusted professional and part of the medical field, you were seen as a, I guess, as a bastion of health. That's probably a little bit hoity-toity on that one, but aside from the professional perception, what were sort of the personal internal dialogue that you were having at the time, and how you felt like you were maybe misrepresenting yourself when you're being a trusted advocate for the people that you were working with and for your clients?
Yeah, there's a lot of internal dialogue. Like, why am I doing this? I should know better. Like, oh, I think that one and all the shoulds. I should know better. I was an ICU pharmacist, so I've seen people with alcoholic liver disease, on their deathbed. You think I would learn from that? I knew the statistics, right? I'd study the literature, trying to convince myself. I'd read quit lit books and thinking they had the answer. I just, the more information I took in, because I'm a constant learner, it actually made me feel worse. And I'm thinking I should be, that these ways of learning should motivate me to want to quit, but they never did. I would just kick back some Chardonnay every night and just think this was amazing. And it helped me parent and it helped me de-stress. And I earned this place and I earned this reward. And, it's not that bad. I still pay my bills. I still
Hmm.
go to work, right? It's not really impeding my life from like, the stereotype we have of the true addict. I'm not drinking right when I wake up. Actually, I had no desire for alcohol at 6 or 7 in the morning. That just sounded gross. It was just this nightly thing. And I'm like, okay, this is like a nightly habit. And I really look forward to it. I really enjoy it. How am I going to do this? Can I moderate? Because, of course, that was a whole discussion. I was told in pharmacy school, and everybody else is like, oh, if you can't moderate, eliminate.
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, well, is this a path that I can do? So there was a lot of the inner dialogue about this. And then why do I keep doing this to myself? I hear that a lot from myself, my clients. Why do I keep doing this to myself? I know better. And so just having that go on for almost a decade, you just get tired of the record playing. And you're like, all right, I need to do something more than listen to podcasts and more than read a book. Like, let me see what other resources are out there. And that's when I went to Google to look for help on how else I can do this in a way that I felt my reputation wouldn't be jeopardized, and I could do this privately and confidentially without it hitting my medical record. And so those were the two big things that were important to me upon, you know, taking a route that I felt that I can heal.
Hmm.
And I didn't even like the word recovery. Like, that felt like a jail term. Like, it felt still, there was just so many words that my body was just like, "Ugh, I don't want to say I'm in recovery. So I just say I'm healed."
I understand that. If I wanted to find some way to detail recovery, then again, this is, I'm almost just like pontificating for the fun of it, but it's like, if you look at the aggregate condition that a person may be in at an age, and if you find that you weren't up to that average, then that would constitute a lack of wellness, which would mean, okay, well,
Hmm.
I am on the course of recovery. So that's like, it's almost like working hard to get to the answer regardless of the means. And so that's me just like, okay, if we absolutely positively had to use that word, how would we use it in a way that that makes contextual sense? But the point being is that it's just
Yes.
working too hard to it. But what you touched on that I think is something that everyone needs to be conscious of is, how much of our lives we are tailoring in service of this rather than it being used as a tool to help enhance our lived experience. Is how much of our and as a weed user, things get pretty fun when I'm on weed. So like, how much of my day am I sacrificing in the interest of using this drug, and using weed, and it's a difficult process.
Yeah. And looking at, how do you want it balanced in your life? Like, when I started cutting back, and I'd say half a bottle to a bottle of wine a night, most nights, right? If I needed to like fast for lab work or something, it wasn't a problem to give it up for 1 or 2 nights. But any more than that, it was like, well, I kind of still want it. So
Mhm.
let's just have it. But yeah, really finding where you want it. And so I was thinking like 6 nights a week is kind of excessive, especially if it's a bottle. And then on weekends, it's mixed drinks and hanging out with friends, maybe even visiting wineries and taste testing. Um, just having that privilege to do that, it felt amazing. And it was just something I was like, okay, I just don't want to be doing it this often. And so even cutting back 50% was a huge difference. And then you don't think you going to want more, or you don't feel like, but when you get to that 50% less, I have to say, then it felt great for a couple months. And then I hired another coach and I'm like, I want to go further. So I hired a different coach and I'm like, okay, now this reduced amount now feels too much. And so I just honored my body and where it was and what felt like too much, and kind of fine tuning that balance as we go. I know like some people would criticize that and should be done overnight or cold turkey, but I didn't want to be counting days. I didn't want to be receiving chips or tokens. Like none of that felt uplifting to me. So I just wanted to honor what felt good for me. And so finding a path to do that.
Mhm. I want to just detour for a second because there's something that I'm personally curious about. So, in the pharmaceutical industry, as it relates to how you may be perceived both by clients and by fellow professionals, were you allowed to give any credibility to alternative healing methods such as naturopathy, or was it seen as less legitimate than what you were doing and you had to keep it at arm's length?
Yeah. So I fortunately, in the end, was in business for myself. So I didn't have the parameters put upon me by somebody else. But I will say, if you do work in traditional environments, yes, it would be looked down upon and less accurate or less data driven. So, it's all about what the data is. And if there's not data there, then of course it's more quackery than anything.
Fair enough. Now,
Yeah.
the last question that's sort of part of the backstory side to this, at least objectively, but it always can continue to come up anyways. So one of the more traditional questions that I always like to ask is, skills wise, is for instance, when I last week I spoke to someone who had been in the dance field, and I would ask what skills in that field were developing that became a core set of skills that came with you as you entered into the coaching space.
As a coach and as the client, right? So I teach a set of skills to the client, but as a coach, it's really helping them find out what's going to work for them. So I think it's imperative that you have an open mind, and not just preach the way I got help and healed, but I'm open, very much open to what avenues do they want to explore, just coaching, things outside of coaching, and really putting them in charge. Uh, a lot of times I've seen people be shamed for wanting to think independently in maybe group settings, or you're not following the program as the program is, and there's 12 steps and you need to follow all 12. So I do work with people who come out of those programs and they worked for a while, but then all of a sudden they didn't feel aligned, or they felt shamed or whatever. So I really want to empower the individual back. And I think that's a skill set as a coach, is empowering the individual, because they're going to hear a wisdom from within and following that. And never shaming, never shaming. So a very judgment-free zone. And sometimes when you are allowing space for somebody to express themselves, they might see the silliness of the ways that they've been, and you don't have to point that out. They just tend to notice. And then once they notice, it's like they can't unnotice, they can't unsee it. And so what starts to do more behavior change than you coming with a wagging finger that you need to follow these protocols.
Mm-hmm. I learned
That's what I
that.
find helpful.
I learned that as well. This is probably about a few episodes back now, but it's the difference between telling somebody what to do versus asking them questions about their behavior and
Mhm.
allowing that inner narrative to come to a realization and to say, "Oh wow,
Mhm.
maybe I should do this, or maybe I should change it in this way."
Exactly. Yes. And And it's like you waking up to you. And that feels so amazing. That feels way better than taking somebody else's advice and trying to implement it when it doesn't feel aligned with you and where you're at in your journey. So there's Maria Salovich. She wrote this great book. I had her on my podcast called um, Undoing Drugs, I think it's called.
Okay.
And she says, just meet people where they're at. And I love that quote, just meet people where they're at. Because I might be in a time and place where I really want change. And some people aren't yet there. They're just warming up to it. And so if you meet them and take them just to the next step, they are getting change and progress, making progress.
Right. And that seems like if I were, say, if I were asked, how would I go about working on this habit change? And it's what I mentioned earlier about Kaizen, although I hope I'm not confusing that with Ikigai. I see both of those on TikTok a lot. It's a gradual periodic change. So let's just say, for instance, if the more I zoom out, the more I can feel like I'm actually making tangible changes. So let's just say I had 20 smoking sessions in a month, and then the next month is 18 sessions. And then a month after that, it's 17.5. How I managed to get it down to a decimal point? Well, there is such a thing as microdosing, but the point being is that those gradual changes will yield the results that we're going for over the course of a year or the course of a couple of years. But I think for a lot of people, they're coming into this from a place of crisis. They don't see it as a problem. We don't see it as a problem until we feel we've crossed that point of no return where it's too late or something irreparable has happened, a relationship has been damaged. So now we don't have to say names or anything like that, but what would you say have been some of the client stories that have really encapsulated some of the less than effective methods that people have turned to?
Yeah. So what I've seen is I actually work with a lot of women who don't want it to get to that catastrophic phase. So when it's starting to affect something that's important to them, maybe it's their relationship with their kids, or they're a mom and now their kids are pointing out their drinking as they're 7, 8, and 9. And that's really disheartening for them. And they want to show that, a good role model. And so that might be the impetus and the reason they start looking at cutting this back. I've worked with women who they got through a divorce, and that was a coping mechanism, right? To get through the divorce. It was ugly, it was painful, a lot of tears, a lot of sorrow. But now that it's happened and it's been maybe a year or some, they're like, well, my drinking pattern hasn't changed, and I don't know why I keep drinking this much. And so it just really feels like they fell into this habit, and now they want to cut it back. For some women, they come and it's like, gosh, I'm gaining weight. And I think it's because of eating and drinking and all the things. And so can you help me with this part of it so I can start having a healthier body? So there's many whys why people want to come and clean it up a bit. And they really like a more gentle approach, because we can be more gentle if it's not destroying their life and they're still functional throughout the day. So I think that is a benefit when you catch it earlier. So I love that term, gray area drinking. And that's really where I like to work with women and people, is just really around this before it gets to like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I let it get this bad. And now I'm, really down and out, or I've really damaged relationships that seem irreparable.
Mm-hmm. Do you, and again, if I'm maybe getting a little bit too much into personal territory, it's all good, but it's better to ask than to leave it hanging. Have you had to deal with situations where someone felt there was some form of like relapse or progress had been unwound, and
Yes.
and maybe like a different strategy or doubling down of strategy had to
Yes.
happen?
Yes, absolutely. And I actually start talking about that in the beginning now more so people can expect that's going to happen. And I say it's just a learning opportunity. I don't want to call it a slip up. I don't want to call it a relapse. I think framing it in a way that, we can get back up really quickly from this, but we can also learn. And so I do a whole exercise where we wind the tape back and we look at where we could have made different choices and why we made the choices we did. What's there still to learn about this divorce, or why we felt so much urge for the alcohol, and really looking at that and then trying to solve that without alcohol, right? Trying to see, okay, what else can we do instead, or maybe even not do? right?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
just sitting, it could be a benefit rather. And like a lot of women also feel like I need this to unwind because I'm a go, 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 go. And it's the one thing I do that when it enters my life, it's a signal to my brain that, oh, I get to relax now, or it's mommy time, or it's me time. And we can make that through some other ritual.
Hmm.
And so it's really saying, okay, we can save that ritual for Friday and Saturday if that still feels good to you and that's what you want. But it doesn't have to be the only ritual that transitions you to me time or mommy time. It could be something different Monday through Thursday. So just seeing where they're interested in cutting back and by how much, these are all the goals that we set in the beginning. And then knowing that slip ups, like back to your question, slip ups or whatever we call them, are part of the learning process and they will happen. And sometimes that's why people wind up coming to me is because they feel so guilted and shamed in these other programs and they just can't go back, right? They just feel, I can't call my sponsor. I can't go back to this because, gosh, I don't know why I keep doing this. And if you look at the addiction research, it's a lot of times you're going to slip up before you actually, for most people, it's rare. It's less than 3% of people who can quit cold turkey and never go back to it again. So when I share data like this, then people are like, oh, so this is supposed to happen.
Hmm.
I'm not just the one black sheep. And I'm like, no, this is actually very common. I mean, if you look at the quit attempts for cigarettes, I think it's like the numbers in the high 20s or 30s before somebody's really successful.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole sub industry dedicated to giving people products that serve as an intermediary between smoking and not smoking, such as
Yes.
patches and I think like menthol cigarettes, if I understand them correctly, are,
Lozenges, yeah,
yeah.
gum. There's a whole line. Yes, you're right. And there's naltrexone, right, that reduces cravings. And so some people think, oh, if I just take naltrexone, that's going to work. But then, our bodies might become used to it, or I see it stop working for some people, or people don't want to be on it all the time. So, these are avenues and things I'm open to. Obviously, if it's going to help you transition until you learn the skills, until you better understand yourself and empower yourself. Yeah, these are fine to use as an
Mhm.
intermediary step.
Yeah, and I want to share this from my perspective because I'm a big fan of putting myself in the crucible. So, what I noticed as a utilitarian minded kind of guy is that the difference between who I am and then who I am after ingesting THC is the difference between
Hmm.
somebody who has a willingness to present myself professionally and do professional work, talk to my clients, and then somebody who wants to cut myself off from all of that. So, and some of that is maybe the shame of being seen as high. And for the record, I'm not high right now, but it's the few times where maybe like I had a little bit too much and it lingered the next day, and then I show up to work are very difficult days for me to get through because it feels like not only a failure of my boundaries but an embarrassment of who I am. And
Mm.
so that's how I one of the ways that I've justified its usage is that kind of like what you were saying, how well now this is mommy time, this is time to relax. It was sort of that same thing for me. It's okay. This is now permission to switch off my professional brain because the idea of facing that environment where there could be stressors and there could be a challenge of some sort is just not something that I want to face
Mm.
until I've recentered myself, woken up the next day. So
Mm.
that's how I found its usage. But at the same time, it's also helped me control it because I know that this is a terrible idea to use if I have to work. Other people trust me, other people respect me, and
Hmm.
betraying that trust is just
Hmm.
not worth the experience. So
Hmm.
it's kind of helped in both of those sides. It's made it more clear the difference between my perspective in the professional setting and my perspective in the personal setting.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'm all for doing things for pleasure as well. My drinking was for pain and pleasure. Like it was for all emotions. It was just the 5 o'clock habit, right? It's like off work. This is what I start to do. It's, pull out the frying pan, start dinner, and then uncork the wine bottle and let's go. So, that's when it felt like it had a hold on me more than I wanted it to. I didn't compartmentalize it as well, I think, as what you were saying. It just was my 5 o'clock thing. You hear amongst people who drink a lot, it's the witching hour. You come home and it's like your body's craving it, you're craving it, and you don't feel like you could get through. But if I made it till 7 p.m., it's like, oh, my cravings would just stop. It's
Yep.
like if I made it through the 2 hours of that day, I could just get through the whole day. It was like I only had problem with it for 2 hours. And so it was like, I know Pavlov's dog and how we get learned behavior and learned helplessness. And I was developing more and more learned helplessness. And so I'm like, wait, this is not where I want to be at every 5 to 7 o'clock. Now I can compartmentalize it much better, like you are saying you're able to doing, but I didn't have that skill right away and early on. It just felt like a compulsion, like I needed to do it, and or I craved it so much. And what who am I hurting? I'm not getting behind a wheel, so it felt self-imposed. Now, of course, I'd be counseling people differently if they were harming others or hurting others or being hurt because of it. Being abused. So I really do think it's individual. And, if it's mucking up your life, let's look at that. And if you did want to compartmentalize it, what would that look like and work towards that?
It actually just occurred to me that I think because you are a responsible user now, that probably endears you a lot more to your clients, that you can set an example, live by example, lead by example of, well,
Yeah.
this is how I live.
Yeah.
These are the challenges I went through. This is how I deal with it now. So you're not going to be working with somebody who abstains. You're working with somebody who gets it and who wants you to
And
enjoy
let
your
me just
life.
interrupt there a minute because I do work with some people who abstain and
Okay,
they
fair.
just like my approach. But I will say if I post on social media or I have wine or a cocktail in my hand, I do get a lot of haters from the sober world or, the people that think it has to be all or nothing. I'm just not binary like that around the substance for most people. And I do want to throw out a statistic that for your audience is that if you really look at the addiction medicine and how prevalent it is. If you look at the CDC, it'll say over 90% of people who overuse alcohol, and they say excessive use of alcohol, over 90% of those do not meet the criteria for an alcoholic. Now, they don't use that term anymore. They use substance abuse disorder. But over 90% don't meet the criteria. So when we're talking about gray area drinking, that's most people. It's a less than 10% are the true people that need it all the time or, really dependent on it and would get, seizures and stuff if they cut back. So I really want people to know that a large percentage of people overuse it. And that doesn't put us in the category of, it's too late or we can't change our ways.
That's a pretty compelling statistic, because it had never I was never quite certain of what is that line between an alcoholic and then somebody who may jokingly call themselves an alcoholic, but not actually have some sort of physical issue or go into some kind of state of shock for not having alcohol. That to the point where someone has to make it almost as much of a priority as oxygen. So that's actually
Yes.
not, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a common question I get. How do I know if I'm an alcoholic, right? And there's good assessment tools. There's one called the audit tool that people can look up. It's a free assessment online and it'll score you. Um, and that helps give you an idea. I think that question doesn't have as much value as other questions. So,
Hmm.
whether you're in this label of a box, with this label or out of the box, I don't think that's as helpful. I think it's like, is your relationship with alcohol where you want it to be, or do you want to make change?
Hmm.
Because I think you can feel like an alcoholic on one day and not feel like an alcoholic a couple of days later, right?
Yeah.
So that's a moving target. I think understanding how you use it, your relationship to it, and if anything is feeling not good about it that you want to change, that's when you can open yourself up to looking for change if you're ready for change. Not everybody's ready for change. I talk to a lot of people not ready for change, and I understand. But sometimes just expressing it and getting on the phone call with someone and kind of starts to plant the seed, and then a couple weeks later they're changing, which is wonderful.
I have to wonder that for people who may be having that discovery call with you, is if because I know I would do this. I wouldn't accuse somebody of something I couldn't potentially do myself. Is if we are spinning our own narratives, and if I were to talk to you about it, and I'm trying to sell you on the narrative rather than just be truthful about it. I don't know if this is something that comes up, but do you have to put on like an analytical hat and try to like read between the lines of what people are telling you?
I do, and I love objective data. So, I'll share, and I've shared on my podcast, my drink count was around 42 to 47 drinks a week on a bad week, sometimes even more on vacation or summertime, if you're boating or, these all day drink fests. So I love to quantify because it just really helps to say, okay, where are we at? Right. I'm not going to judge you for it. Here's my number. I rarely have a week like that. I don't know the last time I had a drink count that high personally. And so I share that so people can really say, oh, okay, it's subjective, but it's also can be objective here.
So
Yeah.
I wanted to tailor the next part of this conversation towards how, because what we've been talking about has been very personal, interpersonal, but we have to also bring in the societal and the cultural aspect of it more so. And
Yeah.
now, inside baseball, Sherry had asked me prior to the recording if she could ask me questions, and just so everybody knows, I feel free. I love being asked questions. So, were there any prompts float around in your head that you wanted to ask so far?
Yeah. So do you know your drink count of alcohol per week roughly, or
Oh,
do you consider your relationship with alcohol
oh,
healthy or one that you're okay with?
oh! I'm quite content with my alcohol consumption. I mean, somebody had bought me a pretty big bottle of Jägermeister in July, and I've maybe gone through like the first 10% of that between, and
Yeah.
it's almost March now. So my drink, I have not objectively counted, but at most I would pour a shot of Jägermeister into a ginger ale or something like that. I had the
Mhm.
weekend where I was hanging out with some friends, so I had one stout on Friday, and then I had one vodka soda on Saturday, which may have contributed to my illness on Sunday. But overall,
Mhm.
hasn't really been a concern for me. So
Yeah, I
let me
love that.
objectively say, like, I don't know, like one and a half per week, if that.
Yeah. So take it or leave it, right? I
Yeah.
could take it or leave it. That's the category I'd say. Yeah. And then how about your relationship with other things? It sounds like weed is one that you're questioning.
Yep. So that's the one that has created some problems for me. Now, my tolerance is pretty high, so let's just say there was an unintended consequence, and I were high right now. I'd probably be okay. Very early on, there were some mistakes were made where like I had a little bit too much and it just didn't wear off over the course of the weekend. And then I had like 3 calls lined up on Monday. I'm like, this is going to be a really difficult day, but I handled it. So
Hmm.
the thing that scares me the most is actually more the combustion and the ingestion of smoke. Now, there are all alternatives to it. There was vaporization, which just is more like heated air. And then there was also edibles. But the problem is actually it's a demon of convenience because vaporization takes longer and it doesn't create the same effect. And then edibles, you basically have to plan your day around an edible because those things might not activate for another 2 to 3 hours. So
Hmm.
when I'm like, okay, I'm about to hop on Warcraft, I would like to have to be ready in the next 5 minutes. And so smoking, what maybe some people don't know about this is that the reason why we perceive smoking to be the better option over vaporization is that smoking actually triggers a little bit of an alarm state in us. It creates fight or flight because the smoke is going in our lungs, and our lungs, by design, rightfully so, don't like smoke. Our chemical reaction to it is very different, whereas vaporization is a slow process. So it does take longer. But it is more of like a controlled buzz. It's almost like the difference between drinking a cup of coffee versus drinking tea. Tea is more timed release, it's more consistent. Coffee is more of that like, oh yeah, here we go, it's party time. So for things came to a head for me probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Is I had recovered from a cough, or so I thought, and I woke myself up at around 1 a.m. With my airways blocked. And for those of you who want to know what that sounds like, now that's scary. That's really scary to suddenly not be able to do something that I need to live. It stopped after about 10 to 15 seconds, and I went to the doctor the next day, and I can't write something this comedic, but she prescribes me 2 inhalers. The first inhaler to deal with the issue, then the second inhaler in case I have a reaction to the first inhaler. I would have written that as a sketch in comedy, but that's my reality for it. So I need to actively mitigate, if not basically stop smoking altogether. I'm 34. I've had my fun, and there are alternatives. I just need to suck it up a little bit and sacrifice some of that short-term convenience for my long-term well-being. So
Yeah.
that
I love how
summarizes
you
it.
know the pharmacokinetics of the drugs. Like the onset is different if I use this formulation versus this
Well,
formulation.
it's
That's
mostly
what we
trial and
call it.
error.
Yeah. And then our bodies are always talking to us. So, I'm approaching 50. And so alcohol, I couldn't drink like my 20-year-old self. And my 40-year-old self is like, this isn't working for you anymore. Right. So as we do age, as our body does give us feedback, whether that's through wheezing or now I can't sleep if I have too much alcohol and I'm waking up and I just don't feel as rested. We just don't metabolize it the same way as we age and change. But listening to your body and then learning from it, I think that's beautiful. And I love that you can talk openly about it. And that's one thing that's part of healing, is being able to talk about it without feeling shame. And as I'm watching your face, there's nothing that's coming across like you're shameful about it. You're just like, oh, I did this. I learned from it. And now I know I have to start changing my behavior because of it. And I just love seeing that in action, because I think people think it's easy for you to talk about your thing. It's easy for me to talk about my thing, but it can be just as easy as for somebody else if you remove that shame and guilt component of it and just realize we are constant learners as our body changes as we age.
I believe in 2 things. I believe in grace, and I believe in good humor. By that, I mean, if we can politely and respectfully find a way to make light of it, laughter is really one of the best mechanisms to help people
Yes,
process some of this. I mean, that's why we go to comedy clubs. That's why we go to shows, is because we need people to point out our issues in a way that make us realize the flaws and misconceptions about ourselves and about society in a way where we don't feel shame, we don't feel guilt, we feel acceptance, we feel a community because everyone laughs together about this. And so
agreed.
it's
Beautiful.
I've sometimes I swing and a miss, and not all my jokes land, but it's the only way that I would want to handle it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and thank you for
Thanks for
asking.
sharing your story. Yeah.
Well, thank you. So here's now in the interest of the comedic side. So what my consistent audience knows is that I am an aspiring author and writer. First book should be out sometime in 2025. It's getting there. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to create a fantasy world that is maybe a little bit too much like reality for its own good, because most fantasy is about like this little intrepid hero staring down a massive dragon, pirates with floating ships in the sky, and betrayal after betrayal after betrayal. And actually, I heard this from someone who worked at the bookstore who was an expert on fantasy. She said, "Yeah, fantasy just takes itself too seriously." I'm like, not this book. So much so that the cover that I visualized for it was the main character and his wife both sitting at a bar, holding onto beer mugs or ale, and looking kind of dejected, like they just had a long day. And then I started seeing it started cropping up in media a little bit that the Overton window for alcohol consumption had started to change, and that a lot of people started having a more of an extreme caution towards it, where they refuse to view it as anything other than poison. And that term is effective for persuasion, I will say that much. And when I found that out, I simply said, God damn it, because I wanted to use alcohol as a literary device to relate the characters to other people, because this is what people do. I wanted to create settings where they go out and they have smokes. I wanted to create settings where they have parties and people wake up and have hangovers. I wanted to create something relatable. And so for the idea that there is more of like a almost like a cultural shift away from alcohol. I'm like, oh man, we could just hold off for like another couple of generations. Ah, damn it. So that's just my observation, but I'm just wondering, with your finger on the pulse of culture, and you know, you're not just working with mothers, but you're working with their children too, is what seems to be the zeitgeist of alcohol use, especially for upcoming generations.
Yeah, I've seen a big trend in the 20-year-old space of, moving away from it or lower alcohol by volume, seltzers, White Claws, that kind of thing, just really being embraced. So I don't really want to say it's zero. I mean, there are bitters and stuff, and there are dry bars popping up, in Colorado and New York City and stuff, places like that, setting a trend. But I definitely don't think it's going to change overnight. I see it as like smoking, where you slowly phase it out. And I will say a lot of people in my generation just find it fascinating and learning about it and the grapes and studying it. It's almost, like these wineries. I'm in California, so there's a lot of wineries here, and people embrace it upon like an academic intellectual foray for them, or as a side hobby or side thing that they get really interested in. So I don't see it changing overnight, but I do see the landscape changing slightly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the younger generation.
Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to share just how I view not just alcohol, but a lot of its comrades in arms in society. So this is sort of like the big picture. I don't know if we're going to get an answer here, but if we can move the needle, that would be mission accomplished as far as I'm concerned. So I'll give you some anecdotal stories here. So I did stand-up comedy for about 3 years, and every so often it went well, but it just at the time, you know what it was, is that I was too pretentious. I refused to play easy cards. Like some people would just talk about their ethnicity, some people talk about drugs or sex or whatever, and I just refused to do any of that, which meant it was only like the really like neurotic people that would laugh, and we just didn't have enough of that. So it was on me, right? I didn't want to blame the community for it. It was on me. So I sort of eased up on that now. Now, if I go back, I'd have no problem making fun of my fellow Italians. But what I'm getting at is that I didn't smoke cigarettes at the time. I've barely touched them. I have one every so often on set, which I'll get to. But I would just look out of the corner of my eye, and I would see people like kind of like mime to their friends, like, for the audio listeners, I'm doing like the smoking gesture, and then I was like, oh, okay, yeah. And then people get up and they go outside and they smoke, and they have a social bonding experience outside.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff is precious. And I've since been able to be in some of those circles because I do background work for film and television, and it's kind of an honor to be let into the smoker circle, and you just have conversations that just are not going to come up sitting at the table. Obviously some of that has come up with alcohol, which we've covered, but even some of like, I want to say lower tier drugs, because what's the only thing that's coming to my mind at the moment. But stuff like sugar or stuff like caffeine. Caffeine is a drug too. Let's make no mistake about that. I remember this was in one of the earlier shows I'm producing. The guest and my co-producer, we're driving around on the way to the apartment to record, and she pulls into the Starbucks for her fourth cup of coffee that day. Now, credit where it's due, it was a lot of milk, but still, it was 4 cups of coffee that day. She asks, she turns, I'm sitting in the back seat. She says, so do you want anything? And I said, no, I had 1 cup earlier today. I'm good. And she's like, what is the matter with you? And it's just like her perception was like 4 cups. She had to have it. Anything less than that was unfathomable. And it just seems like society just doesn't function unless we have some sort of communal poisoning ritual, so that we can all commiserate and bond over something that we acknowledge. Maybe we're taking a couple of minutes, or maybe we're taking an hour off of our life in the interest of forging these deeper bonds. So, and again, we I don't think we're going to get an answer, but the first step is to ask the question: have I just not been giving like book clubs and knitting circles enough credit? Or are we perpetually going to have to accept some level of sacrifice in order to stay bonded to one another?
Yeah, I think, we're And the generation behind mine, for sure, which could include yours as well, I think there's a lot more open-mindedness around these rituals, right? I don't find anything wrong with meeting up for some of this in moderation or a little bit. I've been to book clubs where I'll just bring my own club soda and I'll put it in a wine glass. I will show up to the same book club, a couple weeks later and engage in drinking. So I let my social network really know that my drinking is a state of flux. It's not, I'm always showing up as the drinker or always showing up as the non-drinker. That was important to me. Um, but I think you can also find friends and join groups where they think like you or be more open-minded. I really don't feel it's as stodgy
Yeah, yeah.
as it used to be, but maybe in the smoking circle, I don't know. I've never been a part of that circle, but I feel when it comes to alcohol, people are a lot more about, pro-choice, meaning are you going to decide to imbibe or not? And I don't feel as much peer pressure. And that could just be it's taken me a long time to feel confident in how I show up and how I present myself. And when I turn it down, I don't have a frown on my face, or I don't say, I'm sorry, I'm not drinking tonight. Like I've seen other women try to claim this space of like, I'm not drinking tonight or no right now. And just the way they present themselves doesn't really convince the person who's offering. So the person really wants, if you're in their home or you're at the bar or the waiter really wants a good tip, right? They want
Yeah.
to ensure that you are enjoying yourself. And so if you come across and you kind of have this painful look on your face when you say, no, not tonight, I'm sorry. Like, and so people are going to feel like more inclined to like perk you up. And so they might over offer on the alcohol or over push on the alcohol. So I think it's also our ability and how our skill set is in coming across and saying, "Oh no, I don't want any tonight, but I would love some club soda."
Mhm.
Like, and then that takes their brain to like, "Oh yes, problem, club soda, need that," and then they're off to solving that problem for you.
Mhm. It,
Yeah, so I think it's how you present yourself as well, part of that.
presentation, I think, is the key word there because as you were answering the question, the back of my mind just thought like, if say people were what it's just like soda, right? People say, "Oh, you want to go outside and do some pop?" And then there's like a Coca-Cola bottle, and we're just like pulling into little shot glasses. Like, all right, everybody, we're doing pop. And this ties into what I had said what we said at the beginning of the episode about the demonization aspect of it. Is that taking the edge off of it and making it seem less rebellious also goes a long way too. And just accepting people, they're going to do this, they're going to do that.
Hmm.
It's most things done in excess look bad. It's just some things are easier targets than others.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely agree with you on that.
So we've basically just hit the hour, so it is high time to start wrapping this up. A couple of traditional questions that we do ask on the show is what sort of challenges are you working on day to day? Some people like to take this in the granular direction where they're just like, just my YouTube presence or my social media presence. Other people are high-minded and holistic about it. So what are you sort of the challenges that you as a coach are tackling right now?
Yes, for me, my recent rebrand of my podcast, it was called Drink Less Lifestyle, and just this year I switched it over to Health Habits and Epic Living. Because I think alcohol can have a place. And I think drink less lifestyle, people were thinking alcohol had no place or all of that. So, and then opening up the discussion of not just around alcohol, because the more you focus on something you want to do less of, the more your brain wants it. So, my struggle has been like coming across how the rebranding has been going across all my platforms. And I bet you because that's not succinct,
Mhm.
people might be getting confused because I'm talking about a lot of things other than just alcohol and our mindset around alcohol. So that's been a bit of a challenge for me is communicating it in a way that people could say, oh, yes, yes, I want to stay a listener. Or, yeah, oh, yes, yes, I want more health in my life through better habits. So that's been my challenge recently.
Mhm. And then what would you say is your vision for the next 5 years?
Mm. I love creating community. I think the pandemic has showed us that we don't do well isolated. I think when you're embarrassed about something or have a bad habit and you don't talk about it, it can eat away at you literally, emotionally, mentally, sometimes physically. It weighs on you. You literally can gain weight over it. So I love creating a community. And so I just really love to I already have a community, but really bolster that community over the next 5 years where women can really connect with each other, feel seen, heard, and supported, and not judged.
Okay, fantastic. If I could go into a bonus round for a second, because you had mentioned that the epic living, because like when I think of epic, I immediately go to like Lord of the Rings, the ride of the Rohirrim, charging down the Mumakil, and so yeah, I mean, like, that's my perspective of epic. And so, what in a person's day to day lifestyle do you want to inspire that epic mindset?
Mm. Uh, really having the confidence to live as themselves. I think that's when you feel epic. Um, you know, so just owning what you are about and what you're not about. I think in a beautiful way that's not, I mean, don't come out like offensive or being boastful, but just say, oh, here's what is valuable to me, or here's my values, and living those out. I think a lot of times we feel like we need to people please, we need to please others or fit in. And so we change ourselves slightly, or maybe not so slightly, to be able to fit in. But we can also be a member and be included by staying true to ourselves. And so I see people use alcohol to fit in at the cul-de-sac parties, or to fit in, and they don't really want to be doing all this drinking, but they want to fit in and they want the socialization around it. So for me, living epically is living true to your values.
Well said. Well, there are certain roles that, while many people can take on as a career, such as acting, these are certain things that we all do. Everybody is an actor because we are all in some way taking on a performative nature for other people, family and friends, different environments. And so it's a challenge to be authentic. I'm happy to say I've taken steps in the right direction, but certainly lots more steps for me. So I will leave it at that. But with that, we've done everything that we can do today. This is my philosophy, which is you always want to run out of time. You never want to run out of questions. But was there anything else that you just wanted to state?
I'd love to ask. Yeah, I'd love to ask you, Joseph, what would you define as epic living for you?
Just making sure that each day really feels like it has its own identity. Because I think we get trapped in the Monday to Friday are interchangeable because they are our perceived work days, and then Saturday and Sunday are the perceived off days. But one of the things that I've done in my fantasy novel, because what inspired me is the idea that, like, I know science fiction oftentimes serves as a blueprint for society, or like or a warning sign for society, and fantasy isn't really known for that. But I think it's an opportunity to rethink things. So in my world, each day of the week is given a truly special identity. So, for instance, Monday is now Morn Day. It's the morning of the week. It's the renewal day. It's the chance to really get the week off to a good start. Tuesday is now Toils Day, which is the work hard day. Like, from sunrise to sunset, you work and you work and you work and you work, and each of those days has a different identity. So that for me is epic living, is just making sure that I respect each day. Some days are high intensity, some days are low intensity. Lord knows my Monday I didn't move a muscle because I didn't feel good, but at least that day had its own identity, and I would look back on that as a calendar day and say that's what made it special. So that's how I feel about it.
Beautiful. Yeah. If it feels good, that's epic.
Excellent. Well, everybody, I can't thank you enough for being a part of the program. Sherry, this has been a fantastic episode. I'm really thankful to have had your time and to share in your expertise. And for those of you who want to reach out, how can they find you online?
So they could go to my website, Epic You, that's spelled epic, and then YOU.com is my website. And then my podcast is Health Habits and Epic Living. And then I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Sherry Price.
Fantastic. And then those of you, if this perhaps is your first time listening, or just your first time you At the end of the episode, you can always email me, Joseph, at impactfulcoachingpodcast.com. My name is spelled Joseph. The rest is spelled the way you're used to. And with that, it is our endeavor to ensure in whatever way you are helping others, we want you to be impactful while you're at it.